What is up, guys? It's the Sound Alchemist, and today I'm back to talk to you about Warhammer 40K, as always. Now, recently we've been playing more and more games of 9th edition to trying to get our bearings, understand what's changed, what's gotten better, what hasn't gotten so good, and for one, the best thing that I love about this is the crazy amount of command points and stratagems that you'll be able to use. However, I'll talk about that at a separate time. This is all about secondary objectives, and these make the game a lot more tactical and really fun in my opinion. So let's dive into what secondary objectives are, because in all the previous editions we've only had primary objectives. Unless you were playing ITC rules, I think they had secondary, but that's only if you were playing like legit like tournaments and stuff like that. So without further ado, let's dive in. So whenever you play a game of matched play, you have primary objectives as well as you'll be able to select 3 secondary objectives based on certain categories. Now the second objectives are kind of capped off at 15 points per category. So if you're keeping track of all this, you can only score 45 points with your secondary objectives. That may be enough to tilt the game in your favor. I also believe that another thing too is that this is where you get that interesting rule that you get 10 points off the bat if your army is completely painted. So another huge push to get your armies painted, guys. And now that I think about it, the last match that I played, I was playing Tau, and usually my Tau army is completely painted, but I had to put in Shadow Sun since I've never used her before, and unfortunately she was not painted, so I couldn't have gotten the 10 points, but if I did, I would have won! What craziness that is. But anyway, so you have secondary objective points that they cap off at 15 each, so giving you a total of 45 if you get all the requirements. Now, this is really interesting because the way they break it down is that you have certain categories and you can only pick one secondary objective from each category. So let's find out what those categories are. So the first category, you have Purge the Enemy. Then you have No Mercy, No Respite. Next up, you have Battlefield Supremacy, Shadow Operations, and then you have Warpcraft, which has to deal with psychic powers. So if you're playing Tau, obviously do not pick anything in this category because you don't have psychers, unless you're playing against a person who has psychers in their list. Like if you're playing against maybe Space Marine Psyker Heavy list or Chaos Demons or 100% the Grey Knights, this is a good one to jump into. But let's backtrack and let's go up to the first category and see what secondaries are available to choose from those. So the first one is called Assassinate. It's a pretty simple one. You score 3 victory points per slain enemy character. This is really good if you're going up against Grey Knights, because they have a bunch of characters that really bolster the army, such as Drago or Grandmaster Voldus. It's pretty easy if you have snipers, or if you're deep striking and your enemy has left their army in a very vulnerable position. So this is probably one to keep your eye on. Next up, we have Bring It Down. You score 2 victory points for each slain monster or vehicle, 3 if it had greater than 10 wounds. This one's also great if you're playing against Grey Knights, because they love Dread Knights. So that's another interesting thing that I'm noticing. But again, if your army is very elite or very vehicle heavy, such as the Iron Hands, this is one that I'm pretty sure your opponent will be playing to get those sweet victory points against you. Next one is called Titan Slayers, and you score 10 victory points if you take down a Titanic model, or 15 if you manage, on the offhand chance, to take 2 Titanic models down. This one will definitely be seen play in apocalyptic games, since that's where you see most Titanic models. And of course, you have Purge the Enemy's last secondary objective, Slay the Warlord. This one gives you 6 victory points for killing the enemy warlord. This, of course, was already a thing back in 8th edition. Usually any game you played, you had Linebreaker, First Blood, Slay the Warlord, and it makes its appearance yet again. Moving on to No Mercy, No Respite, you have the one called Thin Their Ranks. So what you do is you set aside a number of models that you destroy. So you kind of keep track of how many models you're killing, and you add 10 to the tally if you destroy a model with 10 or more wounds. At the end of the game, you count them all up and you divide by 10, rounding down, and that is exactly how many victory points you get. So, if you're keeping track of this, you have to kill a total of 100 models, or I guess if the easiest way is to keep track of it, 100 wounds in order to get 10 victory points. Because obviously 100 divided by 10 is 10. This seems to be an interesting one because obviously if you're playing against hordes, orcs, tyranids, this could be pretty good. You take down a horde of 30 boys, boom, that's already 3 victory points in your pocket. So this is something to definitely keep an eye out for depending on the armies you're playing against. Next up, you have Attrition. At the end of every battle round, you get 4 victory points if you destroy more units than your opponent. This one is fun. This one definitely is one that I would be taking a lot because most of my armies are either, or at least the way I play them, it's either you go to your enemy, take out as much as possible so that the enemy doesn't have as much units to retaliate with. So this really will benefit you if you kill one unit and your enemy can't kill anything in return. And 4 victory points can easily add up since this is at the end of every battle round. This is going to be hilarious if you're playing Tau and the enemy charges at you, and since you're Tau, you can fire Overwatch, and you have the For the Greater Good ability, so you could potentially kill an enemy unit in your opponent's turn, and if they are unable to kill one of yours, you get 4 freaking victory points. That is hilarious. I can't wait to actually see somebody do this in a game. This next one is called While We Stand, We Fight. Basically, you have to figure out what are your most expensive individual models, and the top 3. Keep an eye on those. If they're still alive by the end of the game, you get 5 victory points for each one that survived the battle. This might be a very underhanded tactic if you just hide them in terrain or put them all the way in the back corner and just screen them with enemies or with your models. That way the enemy can't target them, and so that would mean basically 5 turns of your opponent trying to get to these guys, and maybe 15 points is worth it. I don't know. Very scumbaggy. And the last one for this one, you have a Hurst Strike. You score 5 victory points if you destroy an enemy unit on your first round. Very similar to First Blood. And then you score an additional 3 victory points if you end up killing more units than your opponent did in the overall turn 1. This is a pretty cool one. Again, if you're really expecting it to be a balls to the wall type game, like you're both playing heavy close combat armies, just run them at each other, this could be really fun to see who can get the most amount of kills, and hopefully you can have your enemy overextend and you can capitalize on that and come out with 8 victory points right off the bat on turn 1. Battlefield Supremacy is exactly what it sounds. Pretty much all of the secondary objectives that you can get with this has to do with board control. The first one they have here is called Engage on All Fronts. You score 2 victory points if you have a unit entirely within 3 of the 4 table quarters, as long as they're within 6 or away from 6 inches of the center of the board, and then you score an extra 3 if you're in all 4 table quarters. So if you have a deep striking army, this would be really good because you just deep strike on every table quarter and boom, just get 3 victory points right off the bat. Linebreaker is another one we're all familiar with. You score 4 victory points if you have at least 2 non-aircraft units entirely within the enemy deployment zone. However, Linebreaker isn't at the end of the game anymore, it is at the end of every round. So again, really good if you have deep striking things, outflanking things. You could easily get these points up. And the last one is called Domination. You score 3 victory points if you control more than half of the objectives at the end of every round. Now, this one's kind of ballsy because well, I guess depending on where the objectives are. If you're a highly maneuverable army, you could probably get to all of them before your opponent, depending on what army he's playing. But if you think you can go out there, eliminate whatever opponent unit is on the objective and take it, then yeah, go ahead. Go with Dominion or Domination. But easily engage in off runs and line breakers seem very easy to get. Shadow operations is where things start to get interesting. The secondaries here have to deal with actions, and actions are a new thing to Warhammer 40K. So basically, to do an action, you pick a non-character infantry unit, and they forego moving and shooting, and basically they forego all their actions to just specifically do that action. So for example, investigate sites. This is where any infantry can take an action if they're within 6 inches of the center of the board. As long as there are no enemy units within 6 inches of the board, the action is then completed at the end of your turn, and every time you do this, you score 3 victory points. So thematically, you can have a unit right in the middle of the board and just say, I'm not doing anything else, I'm going to declare an action. So you're essentially digging, investigating. If there's ruins in there, your army's like looking to see if they can find anything of note, a relic, a Catan shard maybe. And at the end of the turn, boom, 3 victory points. It's very rewarding, but at the same time it could easily backfire because you can't do anything. If you deep strike into it, you're a sitting duck. As long as there's like you don't have cover or anything like that. So something to think about. The next one is called Repair Teleport Homer, and it's very similar to Investigate Sites, except that you have to be entirely within your enemy's deployment zone, and you get 5 victory points. So a lot more braver and bold you have to be to go for this one. And the last secondary in this category is Raise the Banners High. I like this one. So same thing, it's an action and it only involves your infantry. So as long as your infantry unit has control of the objectives, you can use your action to raise a banner, leaving it on that objective. You then score 1 victory point at the end of every command phase if you have that banner up. If the enemy gains control of the objective with a banner, the banner is removed and you no longer have the victory point. So it's really interesting because as long as you have an objective, you can put your banner up and then leave. As long as the banner is there and there's no enemies around, you still get it. So say you have a unit of Space Marines on an objective. You raise your banner, and unfortunately, you get completely wiped out next turn by shooting. Your banner's still up there, so come your next phase, or your next turn, you'll still be able to get it as long as no enemy units are within there to take the banner down. Really cool secondary objective. I really like this one because let's say your unit didn't get shot down, but you could still stay mobile with the unit that took it. So really, really interesting. And finally we come to the Warp Craft. Like I was talking about earlier, this has to deal with actions, but this action is instead performed during the Psychic phase. So for Mental Interrogation, it's a warp charge of 4. So during the Psychic phase, your Psyker attempts to psychically perform this action, so you still have to roll a Psychic test, and double 1s and double 6s obviously cause you to perils, but as long as you rolled above a 4, you get to do the Mental Interrogation Psychic action. And what this is that it requires you to be within 18 inches of an enemy character, and as long as you can do this without having the Deny the Witch ability take place or rolling perils, you get 3 victory points. Easy as that. This next one is interesting because it's called Psychic Ritual. So you have to roll a warp charge of 3 to get it. It's not that difficult. And you can only use this if you're within 6 inches of the battlefield. so you can't be hugging the edges or anything like that. And as long as you get this off 3 times, you score 15 victory points. Easy as that. I mean, yeah, it sucks because that means that these 3 times you can't use any psychic powers such as smite or anything like that. But if your psyker survives long enough for you to do it just 3 times, boom, 15 victory points. And then finally we have Abhor the Witch. This is really great against psyker heavy armies. Like I was saying, Grey Knights, everybody pretty much is a psyker, so this is like an auto take if you're fighting Grey Knights. And you score 3 victory points for every slain psyker. 5 if they were also a character. That hurts. That hurts a lot, because I'm playing Grey Knights, and this is definitely something that I know Gershwin and the rest of my play group will be using against me. So that's gonna be fun. I don't know how I feel about this, but hey, it gives the Tau a chance to, catch up in victory points against psyker heavy armies, especially when they can't really deny the witch on like smite and stuff like that. So yeah, and there you have it. These are the secondary objectives in 9th edition. Who knows, maybe they'll be putting more secondary objectives as the 9th edition phase continues, because technically it ain't even out yet. And if you are unable to pre-order for that matter, the Indomitus box set, you're kind of out of luck, because you have to wait a little bit longer to get the rules. But yeah, I really enjoy these. These add a whole nother element to your games, because let's say your army isn't made specifically to be very maneuverable and take objectives, and your army is very killy, like you're all about just getting kill points in 8th edition. You can essentially keep that same mindset, keep that same play style, and take the secondary, thin their ranks. So for every model you kill, divide that by 10, that's how many victory points you get. That's really good. There's a bunch of different stratagems that can easily help you get these secondaries, and just the amount of tactics and pre-planning that goes into these type of games is where I think 9th edition will shine. I've heard that the crusade rules, the narrative aspect of 9th edition, is a little wonky, so you could easily flavor these missions and secondaries and stuff to be a more narrative-esque battle, more narrative-esque campaign. So let me know which one's your favorite, which ones you won't be using, and overall, how do you feel about these secondary objectives? I love them. And that's all I got for today, guys. Can't wait to read your responses down below. And as always, I've been the Sound Alchemist, part of One Mind Syndicate, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.